What's going on, people? We are Tottenham TV, back here with some more content for you. We have got Sarah in the house today. How are we doing?
Yeah, your lucky charm. Your lucky charm after the Liverpool watch along.
Yeah, exactly.
Our only point in 2020.
Exactly. We need to get you in for more watch alongs. We only get points on the board when you come into the studio.
Oh my god.
Yeah, I know, right? But yeah, in general, all good. All good. Looking forward to the appointment of De Zerbi.
Yeah, let's touch on that quickly because we're going to get into the financial results, obviously, until the end of year 2025, June 30th, 2025. But in terms of De Zerbi, you feeling positive on it?
Yeah, I'm feeling quite optimistic about it, to be honest. I think mostly because it's like a permanent appointment. So I just think from that perspective, you know, there's a different feeling. I think there's just a different feeling with this appointment because it's kind of like a now or never situation now. So it's just like what's been done is done. He's been appointed. We just had the first, I don't know if you guys saw it, the training video where the players look well up for it and getting involved. So, hey, if the players are going to play for him and we're going to get some points, that's all we need right now, you know?
Exactly.
And we're going to be llooking at the accounts, but it's quite relevant to the appointment of De Zerbi because we've just given him this major bumper contract, 5-year deal, third highest earner in the Premier League. So it's going to be very interesting to see what we can learn from the accounts they've released and what that could mean for next season, what that means for the financial position we're in, and how much is it a risk us giving him this sort of deal.
Yeah, although you'll probably be unsurprised to know that he's not actually the highest paid person at Spurs. So yeah,
Of course not. Of course.
Who is though? Who is Vinay?
Well, we don't know to that degree, but we'll definitely talk about, you know, the remunerations for the senior execs because that's definitely been put into the financials. So
and legacy execs as well.
It's a legacy execs,
It's all in there. Yeah, it's all in there. As much as I can, I'll try and give you an overview of the financial stuff as we go through it. So yeah.
Before these financial results were released, obviously we heard from Vinay saying that Spurs have got to watch themselves in the future about, you know, following PSR and everything like that. But before from that, we were saying, you know, Spurs want to smash the wage structure. We want to back our managers. We want to do this. We want to do that. I guess 94.7 million was the loss that was shown on these reports. But you give us your insight into what this actually means and how detrimental or non-detrimental it is for Tottenham.
Yeah, well, I'll try my best. And I should probably caveat everything that we're going to go through because I'm not a finance bro. So I just want to say that first off. So I am a financial coach. So how I look at all of these things is from a holistic perspective. So you're looking at not just the player side, you're looking at the business as a whole in its entirety, which is actually very relevant for a club of Tottenham Hotspur's size. And I know we probably normally wouldn't go into this level of detail if the club was doing well. So maybe some of it is also a reflection of what's going on in terms of the business at large, if that makes sense. So we know there's been loads of other projects and things going on in addition to the first team and the squad and all of that stuff. So, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so let's get into, shall we bring up the first slide?
Yeah, I can bring up the first slide. So the first slide is just a bit of an overview of the numbers of where the club is currently at. So the first two numbers were on the right-hand side of the column, which is June 23 and 24. Those were the numbers that were published on the Tottenham Hotspur website. So they do this in two different ways. They do a bit of a summary in a press release that goes directly on the website. And then they also have the full report, which in this case, it was a 65-page document, which you can also download from the website. So I've tried to summarize as much as I can, and I've taken the top line numbers and put them in that left-hand column in June 25. So overall, just to give us a really high-level overview of everything, in terms of the match receipts, so this is how much they're making on match days, that went up from June 24. So they are making more money than they were in the 24 season. And one of those reasons was, of course, because of the Europa League campaign. So because we were in Europa League, there was more games to be played, even though not necessarily all of those games were higher ticket prices. There was also the UEFA prize money. So in June 24, that 1.3 million that you can see there, that was actually from the previous season's campaign. So 18 out of our past 20 seasons, we've been in some form of European competition. And because of the way that the accounting works, after June the 30th, anything that's paid after that date gets reflected the year after. So although we weren't in Europe in the 24 season, that is reflected there. So last season, the 34.7 million, that includes the European prize money. So that does include the final games. On my channel, when I gave an update, I said that it wasn't including the final, but that is including the final. So that was all played before June the 30th.
Right.
You also have the TV and media. Yeah, go on.
No, we're just agreeing with what you're saying.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the TV and media, so that is down 127 million. That is down almost just under 40 million. And
Why would that be down? Is that just because we just weren't on TV as much?
Yes, 100%. That is exactly the reason. So you would imagine that a lot of our games weren't broadcast. And one of those reasons, of course, because we were 17th, there was less riding on it. And look, we have the Leeds game this year that's been rescheduled to a Monday night because now that is a relegation battle game. And so that in and of itself just shows, even though last year we were 17th, there wasn't really anything riding on our games. So a lot of the games were played on Sundays, for example, and they might have had other matches that they would have favoured over ours. You have the commercial and other income. So the commercial and other income, this is where things start to break down a little bit more. So we've got to bear in mind that we were also in the domestic cups. So from the domestic cups, we were in the fourth round of the FA Cup and the semi-final of the EFL. And that equated to £100,000. So 0.1 million. So it's way less than you would expect it to be. You actually don't get that much for domestic cups. And our other revenue is made up of memberships, stadium tours, the Dare Skywalk, F1 Drive, the pre-season tour is included in that other income as well. The match day catering, conferences and business events. So that is where the other income comes in. And this is very relevant because of the PSR changes which are going forward, which going forward will just be reflected from the footballing income. So there might be a grey area there where we don't have full visibility just yet on what that's going to look like going forward in terms of the new sustainability rules. So just to flag
what
that.
What about all the stadium events? Is that,
so
is
that falls under other.
Okay.
Yeah. And I'll talk more about that as well. Actually, I can talk about it now because 2 years ago, we actually had 38 events at the stadium. So what's important about the other events is as much as it's negotiated by Tottenham Hotspur, it's actually governed by the Haringey Council. So they give permission to how many events are hosted in a season at the stadium. So last year, that was 48 events. This year, it's actually down to 30. So we actually have less events that are happening this year. Whether that's something that was negotiated, various other things, I'm not sure. But we know that this season there's been less events that have been held at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. And there was a lot of speculation that if or should a doomsday case scenario happened and Spurs got relegated, they would be okay because of this diversified portfolio. But we have to remember that a lot of that is actually not in control or not fully in the hands of people negotiating these contracts at Tottenham. It's also down to the council as well. So I think that's probably relevant to mention. And then you have the total revenue was 565. And then you have the profit from our operations. And we made a loss, as you guys said, overall of 94.7 million. So those are like the top line numbers. Something to note is our largest, so our operating expenses, one of the reasons why we made a loss is because of our operating expenses, right? So that came to about 512 million before football trading. So when we talk about operating costs, you're talking things like transport, you're talking about medical facilities, you're talking about heating of the training pitch, the lighting in the stadium, staff payments, all of that falls under the operational costs. So that is Tottenham's biggest expense. And one of the main reasons why that's gone up in the past year is because they have had more staff at the stadium. So they actually have, go on.
Yeah. Go on.
So they actually have 877 permanent staff, and they also have an additional 617 staff on match days. So to put it in context, the match days, when we talk about, potential relegation and things like that, you have a lot of additional staff which are also being paid out on match days. So if that worst case scenario were to happen, you'd probably see less people going to games and therefore less staff required on those days as well. And in total, the staff are being paid 255 million. So half of our operating costs,
Right, going to staff.
They're being paid staff. Exactly.
Where would Premier League prize money fall into these categories of the of the money income? Where would that fall?
That's a very good question. Off the top of my head, I'm actually not 100% sure. I don't know if it was broken down like that. I'm actually not 100% sure.
So I'm just wondering if because we know that, we finished 17th, so it would be a massive, around 30 million or so, or people are saying, of less revenue we would get from the Premier League in terms of league finishing. So I'm wondering how much that would have impacted things and where that would fall, and we could clearly see the difference. But yeah, I don't know. I'm trying to look at all the categories. I'm not sure which category that would fall under.
It doesn't explicitly say.
Maybe commercial and other income potentially.
Yeah, potentially. It wasn't actually outlined in the report, interestingly enough.
Okay.
Because it wouldn't fall under the other revenue. I'm just double checking to see if there was a number there. I did think that at the time, but as total assets were 2.3 billion.
So as you said, the total amount of the amount of half our operating income goes on staff. Now the revenue's actually gone up from 24, from 528 to 565, but the loss has increased significantly from 26 to 94. So is that because the staff the staff has increased, or the amount we've paying staff has increased?
So if we get up that slide that I sent you, so one of the reasons for this is because the year before we had the Kane money. So one of the reasons why potentially the loss was less significant 2 seasons ago would have been because we sold Harry Kane, and that would have rebalanced the books, because I think we sold him for about 100 million euros approximately, I think it was. So that is something to take into consideration, right? Because that would have offset a lot of our expenses in the previous season. So in the last year's accounts, so the 2024 accounts, in the post-balance sheet, so if you imagine season ends, June the 30th, everything's tied up and noted in the accounts, and then you have the summer transfer window, which falls in this year's accounts, right? So this year's accounts would reflect things like Bergvall joining, Timo Werner, Solanke, even though half these players aren't currently with us, that would have been in the last year's accounts, right? So the net expenditure on these players was 42 million, right? And there is also a contingency there of about 2.6 million. So that would be any sell-on clauses, any bonuses, which potentially might offset our net expenditure. Essentially, what we're saying here is how much we spent on the squad has gone up. And if you look again at the next slide to that, that would be for this year's. So we closed, again, the accounts this June, and you can see that our net expenditure this summer has been 158 million. Wow. So compared to last year, which was 42, we're saying it's basically quadrupled, pretty much.
Wow.
42 times 4 it's almost quadrupled. And so there's various reasons for this, right? We obviously had a lot of players that we sold, which maybe we didn't get money back for. So you've got players in there, you've got a lot of young players that went on loan. You've got players that we bought at last minute. So you've got players in there like Mwani. You've got players in there like Paulinho. I think Paulinho's on the list. Yeah, Paulinho.
Yeah, he is, yeah.
Well, so these are all first teamers who would be on loan but they also obviously have fees attached to them as well. So you've also got to remember the way that the accounting works, because you've got players on different lengths of contracts and various other things like that. Essentially, what we're saying is they told us they were going to spend more money. They have spent 4 times the amount. So this is not actually reflected this year. That will be reflected next year. But overall, one of the reasons why the loss was more significant in the accounts this year is because the previous season, that 26 that we lost, we have to bear in mind Kane would have been sold for that 100 odd whatever.
Yeah.
The other thing to note as well is that in October, there was also that cash injection of 100 million. Right. So everyone thought that 100 million was going to be put towards player trading, right, in the January transfer window that's just gone. However, from what it looks like from the accounts, that has been a cash injection to essentially rebalance the books and ensure that PSR is loosely abided by. But on a rolling basis, we're probably over that 105, but because next year it's changing, there could be some nuances within that. But in essence, what we're saying is they put an additional 100 million to rebalance the books on paper.
I saw something which that this 100 million was to buy more shares, and their shares are going up every year by a certain amount when they sell. Apparently the new owner has to give them more money or something along those lines.
That was mentioned in the accounts. There was a little bit of a reshuffle, but it's not really significant. We're talking like points of percentages here. We're talking like, I mean, I think at the moment ENIC have 86.9%. And then Levy has like a 29.8% of ENIC. Right. So we're talking like points of percentages, which overall probably do equate to millions, but it's more for shareholding purposes than it is like about the money itself necessarily.
I mean, I wouldn't mind a point of a percentage.
Well, yeah. Well, we haven't spoken about how much the directors have been paid yet. So we can dive into that.
But with these numbers, does this play into the narrative of what Vinay was saying, that Spurs are going to need to sell some players to keep the ball rolling?
Potentially. Look, as I said, like I take a holistic look, right? And it depends how you prioritize different areas of the business, right? Because there have been things that they've done to try and reduce costs. So things that you wouldn't expect. So things like they changed the lighting in the stadium on levels 2 and 3. Pretty random, but they made them automated lights so that they save costs. The heating underneath the training pitches, they've also had some kind of change in that regard to try and reduce the gas consumption. Very random things, but ultimately these are huge expenses overall. So there are other areas of the business where potentially they could make cutbacks, including streamlining the staff. But from what it sounds like, they've just hired more staff. So we don't know what roles they are. And when we talk about how much the directors are being paid out, potentially they could be taking a bit of a pay cut as well.
They probably should do after this season, I'll tell you that.
Yeah, but in all, like they've changed things like the heating in the stadium, the aircon, like stuff like that. They've been improving. There's also been technological advancements in the stadium. They did a rebrand. All of those things have been done for a long-term projection to try and streamline some of the finances in future. So potentially they could look at reducing the cost of the squad. Obviously, if Spurs got relegated, there would be more of a conversation around that. But it also factors in selling players at the right time. And for me personally, I think that's one of the reasons why we actually sold Brennan Johnson in January, to try and get some money back for him. And as much as people were upset about that, he's not good enough. So we can have that debate another time.
But on the other side,
he's not good enough, but he's better than no one.
That's also true.
Well, Kudus will be back next game.
But when you look at it from the other side, like when ENIC 2.0, when they came in, when Levy left, they were talking about how they're going to smash the wage structure and they're going to spend lots of money on the team, and they're going to really back the managers and with players and stuff. But looking at these accounts, how realistic is all that rhetoric from them?
Well, we have spent more money. The question is that we're not spending it in the right way, because we keep rebuilding and then firing the manager and rebuilding and firing the manager. And because we've been going in this cycle for so long, the players that we have are bloated in some areas. We were just talking that we don't have right wingers, partly because Odebear Kudus is injured, but it's more to do with the strategic planning of the direction of the squad at large. And I think partly that is why De Zerbi is a very good appointment on the basis that it's a long-term project, because now we can go into this, giving him 7 games, he can assess who is worthy of being in the squad, who isn't, what fits his style and what doesn't, and what does he need in the summer transfer window. Not everything is always done in one transfer window. Usually it's going to take 2 to 3, maybe even 4 transfer windows. So it's going to be a phased approach is what I would say, you know. And look, you've got players in there as well. Like, we probably won't keep Wamani, you probably won't keep Paulinho. I don't know if he fits into Zerbi's plan. So that will be something that they probably reassess this summer, I'd imagine.
So shall we look at the debt position next?
Yeah, we can look at the debt position. So interestingly, nothing's really changed on this front, but just to, I guess, top line it, realistically, we know that the stadium comes at a lot of debt. And typically how I describe it to people is if you were taking out a long-term mortgage for 20 years, right? So you're looking at, on average, the maturity of most of our debts is 18.5 years. So we've got a long time for a lot of those loans to be paying back. What we can take from this is generally you're looking at around 25 to 30 million pounds per year is just repaid in interest. So that comes off our books. Something that I actually didn't realize was quite a significant chunk of our overall debt was actually taken out during COVID. So whilst I think about 700 million is on the stadium, actually 250 million was taken out as like a reserve. They raised funding basically during that COVID period. So that has a slightly shorter term, but on average, you're talking like 17 years. So in essence, what we're saying is it's not a huge problem. It would become a bigger concern if the club went down, as would everything, right? Because you'd still have an obligation to pay, and then obviously your profit and loss has to be significantly less in the Championship. But in terms of the Premier League, it's all planned for. And one thing that the report did raise was that they have planned for a best and a worst case scenario. So they contingency planned for sort of 100 million over. It was 62 million over and 100 million loss. So it's kind of there is like planning in place, because they have reserves funds that they could dip into should a worst case scenario arise. So I think generally that was the sort of takeaway from the debt side of things.
So am I right in saying when you're in the Championship, you can only make a loss of 15 million per year? Is that right?
I thought it was 13, but it might have changed.
Yeah, but around that ballpark, 15 to 13 million, around
yeah,
that ballpark figure. And with the way we're spending money on staff and everything that you've just mentioned, I mean, how is that, even with the kind of reserve fund that we have, how is that going to be sustainable and work?
God, you're asking me questions that we have yet to see, and we better hope that we don't get relegated, because most of the contingency planning, or most of when they plan for these best and worst case scenarios, most of it was looking at things like changing climate or the surface of the stadium flooding, for example, with heavy rainfall. It wasn't looking at if the club get relegated. So in all honesty, it was like, what if the temperature goes up 2 degrees? How does that affect, comfort in the stadium and the aircon and the cost of that, rather than if we get relegated, what does that look like? So I would imagine that they would have to have a big cash injection. That would be the first way that they would mitigate that. They would have to have the ownership to put in money. That would be like, and we know a couple of seasons ago, they put in 250 million on top of this 100 million that they put in this year as well. So potentially that's one way out of it. The other way out of it is forcing Levy to sell if ENIC don't want to sell. So they get in a minority shareholder who is going to invest money. And potentially, this is why we're hearing murmurings of Levy trying to get more shares in the club, because maybe he's gearing up for a sale. We don't know that. It's speculative, but there would have to be a cash injection from somewhere. Of course, along with probably pay cuts, redundancies, you'd probably look at bonuses lost, all that kind of stuff would fall into that. So there would be ways around it.
Yeah, there was rumours of Levy potentially hiring a law firm to potentially sue ENIC. I'm not sure what for, maybe unfair dismissal or something like that.
So,
I don't know what.
From what I was seeing is back in 22 when the whole betting scandal and whatever, Lewis was charged and everything. There was speculation that basically Levy was entitled or wanted 10% more stake.
Oh, really?
Whether that was in agreement, whether it was on paper, we don't really know that yet. And I speculated on my channel yesterday that it's probably because it's a slow PR news day and Levy wants to get back on the PR spin. So whether that's true or not, I don't actually know. But it's been all quiet on the Western Front in terms of Levy. So it wouldn't surprise me if he's come out again as they're gearing up for a sale. Look, there's probably going to be a cash injection from somewhere, I would imagine, even if we probably stayed up in the Prem, you know?
Okay.
And when you look at the overall figures from the club that have released this year, and considering they've given De Zerbi this big deal, how far from people have their concerns from a footballing standpoint or whatever, but from a financial point of view, like, what do you think of the finances behind this De Zerbi deal, given our current accounts?
Right. So there were some things that I had questions about. I had two main questions when I was going through this. First was, how much did Ange get paid out in bonuses for winning Europa? How much was Ange's severance for leaving or getting fired? And how much did we pay to hire Frank? And how much did Levy get paid to leave the club, right? They are four massive expenses. Unfortunately, you don't have that level of detail in the accounts. It's general. So just to give you an idea in terms of like the director's side of things, because obviously we don't quite know where the managerial salary fits under in terms of the financing structure in the accounts itself. What we do know is the total aggregate of all of the remuneration for the directors was 7.8 million. So all of the directors would have received combined 7.8 million. That was up from 5 million. So for context, the highest director, who I would assume is Daniel Levy, or was Daniel Levy, received 5.755 million. So he received close to a £6 million payday, which was up from 3.7 million. I assume he's the highest paid director, or was at the time of making this accounts. And there was also recorded a 6.661, so just over 6.5 million in directors' loss of office compensation. So whether that went to Donna Cullen, whether that went to other members of the board that resigned in the past year, that could have also been. I mean, I would assume that the terminology that the manager wouldn't fall under like a senior exec. So I would imagine it's somewhere in just the overall accounts in terms of how much Ange was paid. But what we do know is that the directors were paid a hell of a lot of money. You're talking like close to 14 million, right? And in addition to that, there are also incentives which equate to about 13 million. 15 million haven't been paid. So in other words, there's a 15 million pound there, which are for bonuses, for, meeting certain criteria, which are paid out when those criteria are met, right? So you're talking like an additional 15 million. So within that, we don't quite know, but for context, the year before it was 800,000. So you've gone.
Bloody hell.
You're
That
talking
is
about
crazy.
You're talking about
That's nuts.
The directors being paid.
These criminals, I'm telling you, these criminals, they're taking how much
crazy,
money they
yeah.
take out of this club. It's nuts.
It's crazy, right? When I saw that number, I was thinking, hang on, I got to read this again, because that's a hefty chunk of
Wow.
the total overall. So basically what we're saying is that this is like the remuneration committee, right? When they get their bonuses and it's all assessed based on the results and everything. You're talking about over the past few years, it's been accrued. So it's not just 1 year, it's been accruing for like several years, basically. So they haven't actually been realised, those 15 million bonuses, but it's sitting there in a pot ready and waiting. Some of that might have been down to the Europa League money, but every department's going to have different criteria. It's assessed across the board. So
Do you reckon Levy knew what was about to happen and he's like, you know what, I'm giving myself one last bumper pay rise?
Well, they did renegotiate the shares earlier last year. So, yeah, as I said to you guys, I think when Frank got fired a couple of months ago now, that we were talking about, sort of the reshuffle and how much he would get paid. I was saying, I think it was with Stell, wasn't it? I was saying that, the Levy departure was planned last year. And that's why these things don't happen overnight, right? Because you've got reshuffles and trying to get extra percentages here and there, which are going to swing things. So it's very likely that, yeah, look, he was the chairman for 20 odd years, right? So he is
Yeah.
going to get a big remuneration for that. But yeah, it is surprising the biggest jump, like from
So-
800,000. But we don't know how much Ange was paid, and we don't know how much the compensation was, unless that falls under director loss of office compensation. But I don't think he was a director, so it's somewhere in that 255 million, basically. But we don't know the breakdown.
Well, I think could you not work out in terms of how much he had left in his contract and what his wages were? Isn't that how it works?
Probably.
Yeah.
But I haven't dived that far into it, I'm going to be honest. But there probably is a way of, I mean, we've seen speculated numbers, but it's
Yeah.
always going to be a speculation as well, whether he got paid out in full or what would that exactly look like. And also, we don't know exactly how much Frank was in there. But yeah, I scrutinized the 65-page document, and it doesn't say our manager was paid X amount, unfortunately. So all we know is that the breakdown between the football staff and the general stadium and support staff. So actually, almost half of the staff are player and football admin staff. So out of those 877 staff, 335 of them are part of the players, part of the players and the admin staff of the football side of things. So you're talking the medics and the coaching staff and all of that would fall under there.
So if fans watching this, if they want, like, having seen all the accounts and explained why, the loss is there and why it's increased, what are, like, the main takeaways from these set of accounts in terms of how much trouble are we or aren't we in financially, and what should we learn from these set of accounts?
Yeah, so look, it's not terrible. It's not terrible, right? We're not Chelsea. We're not 207 million, right, in debt. It's not that bad. We're definitely not as bad as them. It's not the healthiest position that we've been in, but one of the reasons why this is coming a bit more to the forefront now is obviously, as you said, the Premier League performance. We've probably lost money there. I think is it 3.8 million pound
Per position, yeah.
Approximately, right? Now, one of the things that I've speculated, and of course this is all speculation, is because the way that the stadium was financed, it was on the premise that we were in some kind of European competition. And because we've lost out so heavily on the Champions League, and you'll see that was the second slide that I shared with you guys. So if on the second slide you can see.
Vin, if you go to the second slide.
Yeah, so we were talking that
Yeah, that one. Yeah.
We were talking that from the Europa League, right? From winning the Europa League, we made 34.7 million. And something that Ange said in his interview on the Overlap was he didn't realize how much the club actually relies on Champions League money. And one of the reasons for this is because, just put it this way, just for getting in Europa League, you get 3.7 million, right? Just for getting into Champions League, you make 16.1 million. So half of what we made from winning Europa is literally what you get for just being in Champions League.
Yeah.
And in addition to that, you also have money for every position that you go up the table in Champions League as well. So given the fact that previously we've been in Europe 18 out of our previous 20 seasons, we got into Europa League through the back door, but at the cost of being 17th. So going forward, I would imagine that next year it's going to be hit even further because we haven't got any European football and we're finishing, hopefully, I've never said I hope we finish 17th, but it looks like hopefully we're going to finish 16th, 17th, right? So next year, when you ask me, what does this look like going forward? This is why I'm saying I would speculate that they're probably going to need either a big cash injection or for someone to sell or sell a part of their shares.
Yeah.
That would be sort of like one one approach to it. And I think that Champions League is massive. The money that you make in Champions League is like massively underestimated. It's way more than even in the Premier League.
Yeah,
You know,
it's crazy.
maybe you make 30 million from being 10 places higher, but you make that just from getting through to the next phase of the Champions League. And on top of that, you make almost 2 million per win. If you win in the Champions League, you make almost 2 million. So that makes up the difference. So I think one of the reasons why we're seeing what we're seeing now is because we were 17th last year, but also because there's been hirings and firings of managers, because we've had a reshuffle at the top and the directors have taken big money after, you know, being fired from their roles and posts, the TV money as well. So there's a lot of uncertainty about the future, and that's why I think the De Zerbi appointment gives us a bit more certainty around a lot of those things.
It looks like our prize money this season for the Champions League is going to be nearly double what our prize money for the Europa League last season was.
Which will offset us being 16th, 17th.
Yeah, which is just crazy, though. It's just nuts, the difference. Like, we got to the last 16 of the Champions League. We won the Europa League last season.
Yeah. Look,
That's
I mean,
mad.
If we got relegated, considering we have a £96 million loss, and the speculation is that there would be about a £250 million loss from TV revenues and various other things, you're looking probably about £300 million gap that they would have to fill. So you wouldn't lose all that money, but because our position is already, you know, significantly down, then they'd have a gap to bridge. But there are also changes to the PSR rules that I mentioned as well, which I don't know if that's a conversation for another time, but we can touch on it.
Yeah, I mean, right now the rules are you can't make 105 million loss over 3 years, right?
Right. So what's changing is they're having the squad cost ratio rules. So in other words, your spending cannot exceed 85% of your football related revenue and net profit or loss on player sales each season. And this is why at the very beginning, I said it was important to note the other income, because I don't think that falls under football related revenue.
Got you.
So I don't know if there is some loophole around that because it's held at the stadium. But, you know, going to see Conor Ben is not football related revenue,
so
right?
So it wouldn't be included in our income of the 85%.
That's what I've assumed. So what I've looked into is basically, so this, it could actually work in our favour not being in any European football next year, because for UEFA, the squad cost ratio is 70%. So what you're looking at is, I've done some calculations. So based on the 489 million revenue that we make from football, you're looking at about 415 million is what you'd have to spend on the squad, 415. So considering we spent 150, was I just say 158 last summer?
Yeah.
Right.
You can add another 300 million to that, yeah. Or
Right.
250,
And then
yeah.
if you're in Europe, you're looking closer to 342. Of course, these are very loose projections, but with Europe, it's 70%. There are other things about this whole setup as well, because there's like a 30% threshold you can go above and beyond, but we'll leave that for another day because it's a bit complicated. But in essence, you're looking at, they could probably spend maybe 415 in total. And the other thing to keep in mind is, like, there's this whole sustainability and systemic rules, resilience rules, very, 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 I don't know, political, whatever. But basically one of the things in that is that they need to have 12.5 million in working capital. So from the looks of the books, the club currently have about 20.4 million in working capital. So from that perspective, in terms of cash in hand, they're actually quite healthy. They're actually okay in terms of these new rulings. So that's the upside. Okay. And the upside is they'd probably still be able to spend more money because we're not in Europe.
I see. But you're saying if they don't include the stadium, the other income, if it's not football related, all of a sudden our revenue's halved.
No, well, that is taking off the other income.
Oh, that's already taking
off. That's a worst case scenario. That is a worst case scenario. So you're looking about 400 million, let's just say, give or take.
Interesting.
Roughly. But of course, things are subject to change and there's variables to it as well. And players come and go and contracts change. You have existing contracts that need renewing, you know. So it doesn't necessarily mean new players, but there is money. They're allowed to spend more money. The question is, do they have it, and do they want to put any more into the club? Because I would imagine that Daniel Levy, he doesn't want anything to do with the club. He's not going to put in any more. So they're going to need to find a cash injection from somewhere. The saving grace of this season will be the Champions League money, but that won't be reflected until next year. So that might offset because we finished fourth. That's going to have quite a big, because we finished fourth in the table. Forget the fact that we didn't lose at home. That's actually going to have quite a big boost to the numbers next year. And maybe it might just save us potentially, but we'd have to work that out.
But there couldn't be another aspect at play here in terms of commercial revenue, because I heard that some of the commercial deals are towards the end of their contracts. I don't know if that be AIA or BetMGM. I don't know who it is, but that means that probably the next kind of commercial deal might not be as high as those kind of deals.
So we have heard that. There's obviously not that level of detail in the accounts. We do know that the sponsorship last year increased 160 million. That was up from 144 million. Obviously, next year, we're not going to have any European football. Let's park the relegation conversation.
We'll be in the Premier League. We'll be in the Premier League.
We're assuming we're in the Premier League, right? The downside is you have less exposure in Europe. So assuming, I think our AIA contract runs out not this year, it's next year, I'm pretty sure. So you still have another season on that. And I'm pretty sure the Nike deal was over 10 years. So it must be other types of sponsorships, I would imagine. But you've also got to look at it that there are other types of sponsorships that aren't necessarily at the forefront. Of course, we think about the shirt, right? But you guys, you're on YouTube, you watch YouTube videos, some of the Instagram ones, they're sponsored by Monster or whoever. Yeah. That is all probably counted as sponsorship for the club as well. So just because a shirt sponsor might not be renewing doesn't mean that there's other sponsorships not on the table. So they might be able to make that up. And of course, the biggie is the stadium sponsor, which we haven't really heard too much about. And there is a big opportunity of growth there where they could get a big cash injection. And so that could be something that they could explore if they needed big money to come in. So potentially.
So Sarah, are we going to be all right? That's the main takeaway from this. Are we going to be all right?
Yeah. In terms of the finances, I don't think it's too worrying. It's nothing. Look, we're definitely healthier than Chelsea are, that's for sure. And we're definitely healthier. Look, on paper, we're probably one of the worst off in Europe. I think in the UEFA landscape report, we were reporting like the third largest loss in Europe, but that was speculative. And they were speculating 30 million more loss than we actually had. They were speculating 128 million loss, and we actually only lost 94, plus the fact that they've put in 100 million. That will probably offset, but then we've spent more, so it is give and take, right? It's a moving target, essentially, but in the main, it's not terrible. We're not like on a cliff's edge. There is a long-term structure in place, which is giving the club stability. It's not like a risky model or anything like that. We're not going into administration. Even if we got relegated, you wouldn't go into administration, but it would require additional investment.
If we stay up, can we expect a big summer?
Can we ever? But we do have big summers. Look,
you're right.
We just saw all those names listed, right? We just saw those names listed, and I think it's more about reinvesting in the squad in the right places, getting in the players that we really need. Certain players in the squad you can get rid of, maybe get rid of Kinski, Dragusin, a lot of, players that probably aren't worth that much, but need reinvesting to reinvest in the squad overall. And then you've got players coming through, youth players, Vuskovic, if you sold Romero, would he be a replacement? There are maybe some changes that could be made. Look, they do spend money on the squad. The problem historically that Tottenham have had is that we don't invest in the right way because we're constantly flip-flopping between projects and managers. If they go into this first summer as ENIC 2.0, because we have to remember this is the first summer transfer window, and they actually go forward with the De Zerbi project and they align with him rather than, buying club signings because they never backed Frank, really. They didn't really back Frank, you know. And maybe that's because he was still a Levy signing. I don't know. We don't really know what went on in the background. So ENIC would make the case that this is the first summer transfer window with the first ENIC 2.0 manager, and therefore we're going to go ahead and invest in him. Whether they do or not, it's going to depend a lot on how attractive we are as a proposition for some players to come in, you know, in the project that they're working on.
Well, all will be revealed this summer, so keep your eyes peeled. But Sarah, thank you so much for coming on and giving us that deep insight into the Spurs financial picture as it stands right at this second. Everyone do go and subscribe to Sarah's channel, Spurs from the Stands. It'll be tagged in the title of the video as well. But thank you for coming on, Sarah.
It's all good. If anyone has any more questions, put them in the comments. And we'll save it for next year. No, I'm joking. I'm joking. Look, more information is always coming out, right? Especially with the finances. You've got interest rates that are changing on a daily basis. And so that's why some of these numbers are quite loose. And also, we don't have exact details and information. It's even a lot of the stuff that you hear about how much Andrew was paid and how much Frank was paid. A lot of it comes from journalists that get leaked information. It doesn't necessarily come from the exact numbers in the accounts. So I think a lot of these numbers are nuanced, and we have to remember when we're looking at the numbers, really all that matters is what's on the balance sheet at the end of the day. And if they're reporting a loss, hopefully they've put money in to rebalance the books. And then we go again this summer, and hopefully we get new investment into the club. And even if a minority stake is bought out, then potentially we can take it forward and they can move up the table.
And let's hope just Levy doesn't take the club to the cleaners in the courtroom or anything like that, because that could have a bigger detrimental effect.
Look, it's that in itself, that whole conversation is pulling us back. We're trying to move away from that whole Levy era. And he keeps bringing up these press releases and press conferences, which is just dragging the club backwards. And I know people aren't on board with Vinay and Lange, but from the look they've paid themselves heavy bonuses. But from the look of things, like the accounts are like balanced. You know, it's just a case of, you know, how are they actually going to invest that money going forward? Are they going to do it well? Because we didn't see it in January, and that's why a lot of fans, you know, rub people up the wrong way because they told us. But ultimately, they weren't on board with Frank. So they should have just made the decision earlier on Frank, and probably none of this would have happened.
It's time for them to put their money where their mouth is. That's what it all comes down to.
Yeah.
Absolutely. But once again, thank you for giving us that insight. We'll see you all very soon. Let us know your thoughts in the comment section below. Like, subscribe and comment. And as always, come on you Spurs.